Facial recognition technology is advancing at a rapid pace, and lawmakers want to make sure it's not misused. Stephanie Condon with ZDNet has been following the hearings in Congress for us. Stephanie, where does the process stand right now?
Hey, Karen. Well, the process is just getting started. Congress held the first of several hearings on facial recognition technology. And right now, there are effectively no rules governing the way this technology is used by the government or the private sector. So the hearing was in the House Oversight Committee, and if you listen to the witnesses, there are definitely shortcomings that need to be addressed, shortcomings in the technology, questionable ways that law enforcement is using it, a lack of transparency about when it's adopted, no public discussion about when it should be used. So these are all areas where Congress could step in, and there's definitely a case to be made that they should do something quickly because the train is already out of the gate. Like you said, the technology is developing quickly. Cities are already taking steps in one direction or another. San Francisco became the first city recently to ban the use of facial recognition by government agencies. That only applies to local government agencies. And on the other side, you have cities like Chicago and Detroit where they're embracing the technology. So there definitely is a case to be made that the federal government could set some base standards for its use across the country.
Yeah, and Stephanie, when it comes to things like this, no surprise that oftentimes lawmakers have a hard time putting aside their partisan beliefs and actually coming together on things. So does it look like, or does it sound like we may possibly be able to have some agreement when it comes to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's so early in the process that it's, hard to say for sure, but if you listen to the members of Congress this week, there was large agreement from basically everyone on the Oversight Committee from both sides of the aisle. You had conservatives like Republican Jim Jordan of Ohio, the top Republican on the panel, calling this a, quote, 1984 George Orwell scenario. And then on the other side, you had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's something of a liberal hero right now, saying, quote, that we're essentially being spied on and surveilled on a massive scale. So you have kind of extreme rhetoric from both sides of the aisle, making it sound like they really want to work together. And, another reason to think that something might actually get done here is kind of the way this has become a personal issue for some members of Congress, which is an interesting aspect of it. You had, for instance, the top Democrat on the panel, Congressman Elijah Cummings from Maryland. He opened the discussion by talking about how you could be at a rally voicing, your First Amendment rights, expressing support for gun rights or protesting gun violence, or you could be at a rally to repeal Obamacare or in support of expansion of healthcare. And in either scenario, no matter what side you're on, the government could be monitoring without your knowledge. And that could sound like a theoretical argument, but it's actually not. And it's not for Elijah Cummings in particular. He talked about how, I believe it was in 2016, he was at a rally in his district in Baltimore, Maryland, where people were protesting the death of Freddie Gray and police violence. And as protests escalated, we learned later, police monitored social media and in some cases used the photos they collected from social media through facial recognition technology to locate protesters who had outstanding warrants and use that as a basis for arrest. So we've seen the technology being used as a means of curbing speech, and that's very alarming to Elijah Cummings and his colleagues in Congress. In another scenario, Democratic Congressman Jimmy Gomez from California talked about how he has personally been misidentified as a criminal. And, there were no real consequences because it was just a demonstration, but it was last year the ACLU ran headshots for members of Congress through Amazon's commercially available facial recognition system called Recognition. And they ran the photos and compared it with a database of mugshots, and 28 members of Congress were misidentified as criminals. So Jimmy Gomez talked about how this was really alarming for him. He hadn't really thought about the consequences of this technology being misused before. And he said that since then, his office has met with Amazon 9 times. So he's really concerned about it. Everyone on the panel seems really concerned about it and ready to work together for once.
Well, that's good to hear. And most certainly when they bring out those personal stories, it makes it seem a little bit more real what it is that they're talking about or arguing about at the time. So, from here, Stephanie, where does this go, or what steps are going to be taken next?
So far, they're really just in the discussion phase. This was the first of several hearings in the Oversight Committee, and I'm sure other committees in the House and Senate will be taking it up. And in the discussion, they talked about a range of options for Congress. On one extreme, you could enact an all-out moratorium of government use of facial recognition technology until the technology improves, since it's obviously not perfect right now. That seems unlikely, though. On the other end of the spectrum, they could at the very least, require government agencies to disclose when they're using it. So just let people know, like, hey, we're thinking about using this. Another step they could take is passing frameworks for its use by law enforcement. So one of the experts who testified before the committee talked about adopting a probable cause plus standard, which would mean only running faces through facial recognition if there were probable cause, as well as taking other steps to minimize the unintended collection of other faces, and ensuring that the use of facial recognition technology was clearly documented, so it's treated as proper evidence in the investigative process. And Congress could also address the way the technology is used in the private sector if they enacted some kind of rules like Europe's GDPR that could compel companies to get affirmative consent from their users before they collect their biometric data.
All right, well, there's a lot to consider here, Stephanie, and as you mentioned, the train's already left the station, so it is certainly time to be addressing everything really that has to do with this technology. So we appreciate your article on this, and it can be found on ZDNet.